My name is Madeline Griffin, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I believed that love meant compromise, that if you love someone enough, you learn to tolerate the rough edges of their world, even when those edges cut you. My boyfriend Daniel Hayes and I had been together for 3 years. On paper, we worked. We were stable, functional, the kind of couple people pointed to and said, they'll probably get married. But Daniel had a blind spot. Her name was Julia Bennett. They'd been friends since college, inseparable in that way people justify by saying, we're basically family. And in Daniel's eyes, Julia could do no wrong, ever. To me, Julia was polished poison, charming in public, dismissive in private. She had a talent for making insults sound like observations and cruelty sound like humor. Whenever she crossed a line, Daniel would smile and say, that's just Julia being Julia. I learned early on that pushing back only made me look uptight. So I smiled. I endured. I told myself it didn't matter. Until it did. The breaking point came during a dinner at our apartment. Julia showed up alone. Her husband Andrew was out of town visiting his brother. She barely mentioned him, which in hindsight said everything. Halfway through wine and small talk, Julia launched into a story about a dinner party she and Andrew had hosted. And of course, she laughed, swirling her glass. The whole night was a disaster because Andrew has the culinary instincts of a raccoon in a microwave. I'm pretty sure his signature dish is burnt water. She laughed first. Daniel followed. I didn't. I looked at her and said evenly, that's a pretty harsh thing to say about your husband. The room shifted. Julia's smile tightened. Oh, relax, Madeline. It's a joke. Daniel jumped in immediately. Yeah, babe. You're taking it too seriously. Too seriously. That was the moment something inside me didn't snap. It clarified. Because I wasn't watching Julia mock her husband anymore. I was watching my boyfriend defend her for doing it. I smiled, took a sip of wine, and nodded. Ah, I said softly. I see. And in that moment, I realized the joke was never the problem. The loyalty was. I didn't sleep much after that dinner. Daniel fell asleep like a man who believed the world was still in order, like nothing had shifted, like nothing had been exposed. His breathing was steady beside me, warm and familiar, and somehow that made it worse. Because I was lying there listening to it, thinking about how quickly he'd defended Julia. Not Andrew. Not me. Julia. At around 2:17 a.m., I finally got out of bed. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the microwave clock and the blue-white wash of streetlights through the blinds. I walked into the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and picked up my phone like it weighed more than it should. I told myself I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for peace. But peace doesn't come from lies. Daniel had a group chat with me and Julia. He called it the trio, as if that was cute. As if it didn't quietly announce that I'd been added to something that existed long before me. I'd muted it months ago because Julia used it like a stage, dropping little one-liners, half-stories, and comments designed to get laughs. Daniel would react with emojis. I'd respond politely when I remembered. I never deleted it, though, and I didn't know why until that night. Maybe some part of me, some cautious, instinctive part, had been saving it the way people save receipts they hope they'll never need. My thumb scrolled upward, and upward, and upward. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Snide remarks about restaurants, sarcastic commentary about coworkers, little digs at strangers in public places. Julia's humor was like a dart, small, sharp, thrown quickly, then disguised as entertainment. Then I saw Andrew's name. Not once, not twice. Dozens. Most of the messages were sent late at night, the hours when people stop performing and start revealing. One from a few weeks earlier. Andrew is shopping for a suit for your friend's wedding. Watching him decide is like watching a goldfish try to solve taxes. Daniel had reacted with a laughing emoji. A laughing emoji? My stomach clenched, and I felt the first wave of something cold. Not jealousy, not anger. Recognition. I kept scrolling. Another message. Spent the afternoon with Andrew's parents. Now I understand him better. Beige wallpaper and boiled chicken as a personality. Daniel replied. You're savage. I stared at that one for too long. Because I'd heard Daniel call me sensitive before. I'd heard him say he didn't like drama. I'd heard him insist he was not the kind of guy who tears people down. And here he was, laughing along as Julia carved her own husband into entertainment. I scrolled again, and my eyes caught on a photo. Julia had sent a picture of a fancy espresso machine in a showroom. Thinking of buying this. Andrew's midlife crisis will probably be a new brand of herbal tea. We are not the same. Daniel. LMFAO. My mouth went dry. It wasn't just mean. It was contempt, packaged for applause. And the worst part was the pattern. It wasn't a rare slip. It wasn't a once-in-a-while bad mood. It was consistent, casual, comfortable, like cruelty was a language they'd both learned to speak. I set my phone down for a second and pressed my fingertips to my forehead. The apartment was silent, but my thoughts weren't. I thought about Andrew. I'd only met him a handful of times. Quiet, kind, the type of man who asked questions and actually listened to the answers, the type who offered to carry groceries without being asked. He always looked at Julia with this steady patience that used to make me think, he must really love her. Now I wondered if he had simply been trained to endure. And then I thought about Daniel, how he'd laughed, how he'd defended her, how he'd made it my problem for noticing. My chest tightened with a strange grief, like I was mourning something I hadn't even realized I'd been relying on. The belief that Daniel would choose decency over convenience. Because now I knew the truth. Daniel didn't just tolerate Julia's cruelty. He enabled it. He applauded it. And if he could accept that kind of disrespect towards someone else's marriage, what did that mean for mine? A small sound escaped me, half laugh, half breath, because suddenly the whole thing was painfully clear. Julia's humor wasn't the real issue. Daniel's loyalty was. I could have marched into the bedroom and thrown the phone on the bed, demanded an explanation, demanded he choose. I could have confronted Julia directly, asked her what kind of woman mocks her own husband like it's sport. But that would have been too clean, too straightforward. And the thing about people like Julia, people who hide their cruelty inside jokes, is that confrontation only gives them a new stage, a new performance. They twist, they deny, they claim you misunderstood, they call you dramatic. They make you look like the villain for daring to be offended. I wasn't going to hand her that. Instead, I stared at the chat, at the rows of messages that had been sitting there this whole time, and a thought formed slowly, sharp and quiet. Julia didn't need me to expose her. Julia would expose herself. All I had to do was let the right person see what Daniel had been laughing at all along. But not by forwarding it to Andrew. That would be too obvious, too direct, too easy to label as malicious. No, if I was going to do this, it needed something Julia respected. Plausible deniability. It needed to look like an accident. My eyes drifted to the calendar pinned to our fridge. Daniel's birthday was next month. He'd been talking about it in that half-serious way. Like he didn't want a big deal, but also didn't want to be forgotten. A surprise party would make sense. A group chat would make sense. And if I created a new group chat to plan it, it would make sense to add a few friends. It would also make sense to accidentally add the wrong person. I could already see how it would play out, how the shock would hit, how fast panic would spread, how quickly Daniel would scramble to protect Julia, because he always did, and how, for once, I would not clean up their mess. I picked up my phone again. I opened my contacts list, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. We had a friend named Andy, and Julia's husband was Andrew. Two names that sat close together. Two names that could easily be confused if someone wasn't paying attention, if someone's thumb slipped, if someone made a mistake. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the shape of it was there, solid as bone. I sat there in the dark, the blue light from my screen reflecting on my hands, and felt something settle inside me. It wasn't rage. It was calm. The kind of calm you feel right before a storm finally breaks, when the air goes still and your instincts whisper, this is the moment you stop begging for honesty and start demanding consequences. Behind me, the bedroom door creaked slightly as the building shifted. Daniel didn't wake. Of course he didn't. He was too comfortable in the world where Julia was untouchable. I looked down at the chat one last time and thought, you have no idea what's coming. Then I locked my phone, and I smiled into the dark. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I waited a week. Not because I needed time to cool off. Anger had nothing to do with it anymore. But because timing matters when you want the truth to land cleanly. Daniel's birthday was approaching, and with it came the natural excuse for coordination, secrecy, and group messages that didn't raise suspicion. I played my role perfectly during those days. I laughed at the right moments. I listened when Daniel talked about work. I even tolerated Julia's texts when she popped up, as if nothing had shifted. Inside, I was steady. Calm people are dangerous when they finally act. 3 weeks before Daniel's birthday, I created the group chat. I named it something intentionally cheerful, Daniel's surprise birthday. I added our mutual friends first. Safe names, familiar patterns. Then Daniel's sister. Then a couple of coworkers he liked. Everything looked exactly as it should. Normal, harmless. Then I scrolled. There it was, Andrew Bennett. Right beneath it, separated by only a few letters, was Andy Collins, The friend I'd actually meant to add. Same first name, similar placement, an easy mistake. The kind of mistake people defend instinctively. My thumb hovered for a second longer than necessary. This wasn't impulsive, this wasn't sloppy. This was deliberate precision wrapped in carelessness. I added Andrew. The chat populated. A few hey messages rolled in. Someone suggested dates. Someone else threw out restaurant ideas. Andrew didn't say anything. Not yet. I let the chat sit for almost an hour. That part was important. If I posted immediately, it would look suspicious, like the whole thing had been engineered. Letting the chat breathe made it feel real, organic, unremarkable. Then I went back to the trio chat. I selected 5 screenshots. Not the worst ones, not the mildest either. Just enough. The cooking joke, the parents' comment, the suitcase comparison, the midlife crisis line. One more, something subtle, but unmistakably cruel. I scrolled back up to the top of the birthday group chat. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I took a breath anyway, and I posted the screenshots. Then, like an afterthought, I typed a message beneath them. Carefully casual, deliberately misplaced. Okay, but speaking of entertainment for Daniel's birthday, I was scrolling through old chats with Julia, and I forgot how funny she is. This stuff is gold. I hit send. I placed my phone face up on the coffee table, and I waited. It took 43 seconds. The first reply appeared. It was from Andrew. Madeline, I don't understand. Are these messages real? The room felt smaller all of a sudden. Before I could even touch the phone, another message came through. This one rapid, frantic, unmistakably panicked. Daniel. Madeline, what are you doing? Delete this. Delete it right now. Andrew is in this chat. There it was. Not concern, not shame. Damage control. I picked up my phone and typed slowly, letting just enough tremor seep into my words to sell the performance. Oh my God. Andrew, I am so sorry. I thought I added Andy, our friend Andy. This is mortifying. I wasn't trying to share this with you. Please ignore it. Ignore it. As if you can ignore screenshots of your spouse calling you a bulky suitcase. As if you can unsee contempt once it's been framed in text. The chat went quiet. Not the casual quiet of people being busy, but the heavy, suspended silence of something breaking in real time. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No one typed. Then a system notification appeared. Andrew Bennett has left the group. That was worse than yelling. That was worse than accusations. That was the sound of a door closing without a slam. My phone started vibrating almost immediately. Daniel calling. I let it ring. Then Julia. I declined. Texts started stacking up. Daniel first, then Julia, then Daniel again. You did this on purpose. Andrew won't answer me. This is your fault. Fix this. Now. I didn't respond. I poured myself a drink and stood in the kitchen, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. There was something surreal about how ordinary the apartment felt while 2 marriages were unraveling inside my phone. After 20 minutes, I finally called Daniel back. I softened my voice, added breathlessness, guilt. Daniel, I'm so sorry, I said. I swear it was an accident. I can't believe I messed up like that. He wasn't calm. Don't do this, he snapped. You've never liked Julia. You've been waiting for a chance to blow things up. I swallowed, letting the accusation land. Blow things up? I repeated quietly. Daniel, I was just sharing her jokes. You always say they're harmless, that they're just how she is. There was a pause. Then, it's different when Andrew sees them like that. Different. That word again. Different how? I asked gently. Out of context? What context makes the suitcase joke respectful? He didn't answer. I could hear his breathing, sharp and uneven. This isn't funny, he said finally. Julia is losing it. Andrew's not responding. You need to call him and explain it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I echoed. Daniel, those are her words, exactly as she wrote them. I didn't change anything. Silence. And in that silence, I knew. Daniel understood. He just didn't like what understanding cost him. I have to go, I said calmly. You should be with Julia. She needs you. I ended the call before he could respond. I stood there for a moment longer, phone in hand, and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Relief. Not because I'd hurt someone, but because I had finally stopped protecting people who never protected anyone but themselves. When Daniel came home later that night, his face was pale and tight with panic. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, like he wasn't sure which version of the story would work anymore. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something had shifted forever. This wasn't about a group chat. This was about who he chose when the truth showed up uninvited. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. Daniel didn't sleep in the bed that night. Not because I told him to leave. He simply stood in the doorway for a long moment, like someone waiting for permission that wasn't coming, then quietly gathered a pillow and disappeared into the guest room. The silence between us was loud, heavy, charged. By morning, the fallout had already begun to spread beyond our apartment. Julia was spiraling. I didn't need to hear it from her to know that Daniel filled in the gaps with frantic updates while pacing the kitchen, phone glued to his hand like a lifeline. Andrew won't answer, he said for the third time, running a hand through his hair. He left the house last night. She doesn't know where he is. I leaned against the counter, coffee untouched in front of me. And? I asked. Daniel turned on me sharply. What do you mean, and? I mean, I said evenly, what are you asking me to do? He stared at me, genuinely confused. Fix it. There it was again, that instinctive reflex to hand me responsibility for cleaning up something I hadn't broken. There's nothing to fix, I said. Julia said what she said. Andrew saw it. You know what I mean, Daniel snapped. You need to explain the context. Tell him she jokes like that she doesn't mean it. I laughed once, softly. I didn't plan to, it just slipped out. Daniel, I said, meeting his eyes, if someone had spoken about me like that, repeatedly, behind my back, would you be explaining the context to me right now? He hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. That's not fair, he said finally. No, I replied, it's just inconvenient. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered immediately. It was Julia. I didn't hear her voice, but I didn't need to. Daniel's face tightened, his shoulders pulling inward as if he were bracing for impact. Yes, I know, he said. I know. I'm trying. No, I'm not blaming you. I watched him soothe her, reassure her, tell her it would be okay. When he hung up, he looked at me like I was the obstacle in his way. She's not okay, he said. She's terrified. Andrew packed a bag. I tilted my head. Did she say she was sorry? Daniel frowned. Sorry for what? And there it was. Not once, not even now, had the possibility crossed his mind that Julia might be wrong. She humiliated her husband, I said quietly, for months, maybe years, and now he knows. She didn't think he'd ever see it like that, Daniel said, frustration bleeding into his voice. Exactly, I replied. That's the problem. That afternoon, the news finally landed. Andrew had gone to stay with his sister. He wasn't answering Julia's calls. And according to a mutual friend, one of the people still in the original birthday group chat, he'd already contacted a lawyer. Daniel froze when he heard that. A lawyer? He repeated. That's extreme. Is it? I asked. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. You wanted consequences, he said. Congratulations, you got them. I set my mug down slowly. No, I said. I wanted honesty. Consequences just showed up on their own. That night, the fight we'd been circling finally detonated. Daniel accused me of being petty, of being jealous, of deliberately humiliating Julia because I'd never liked her. I didn't interrupt. I let him unload everything, every justification, every excuse, every version of the story where he was still the reasonable one and I was the disruptor. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke. For years, I said, my voice low but steady, you watched her tear down her husband and called it humor. You watched her disrespect another marriage and told me I was too sensitive for noticing. And the second those words had consequences, you panicked. Not because they were wrong, but because they were seen. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't ruin anything, I continued. I stopped protecting a lie. He looked away. That was his answer. 2 days later, Julia showed up at our apartment unannounced. Her eyes were red, her voice sharp and brittle. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She blamed. She accused me of sabotaging her marriage, of being insecure, of waiting for a chance to strike. Daniel stood beside her. Not fully with her, but not with me either. And that, more than anything, made my decision for me. That night, after she left, I packed a bag and moved into the guest room permanently. The line had been drawn, and Daniel had already chosen which side of it he stood on. 3 weeks passed. Not loudly, not dramatically. They passed the way frost spreads across glass. Quiet, inevitable, and impossible to ignore once it's there. Andrew filed for divorce. I didn't hear it from Daniel. I heard it from one of the friends still stuck awkwardly in the original birthday planning chat, the one that had become a kind of crime scene everyone avoided mentioning. Andrew hadn't yelled, he hadn't begged, he hadn't tried to work things out. He'd downloaded the messages, all of them. The screenshots I'd posted were just the beginning. Once he knew where to look, the rest revealed themselves easily. Months of ridicule, contempt, and private amusement at his expense. Julia's humor, itemized and preserved. Her words became exhibits. Julia apparently was stunned. She kept telling people she never meant it like that Andrew was too sensitive, that it was out of context. The law, however, loves context, and the context was damning. Meanwhile, my own home had turned into a frozen war zone. Daniel and I spoke only when absolutely necessary. Logistics, bills, the occasional passive-aggressive comment that pretended to be practical. He stayed loyal to Julia in the only way that mattered. He never admitted she was wrong. Instead, he shifted tactics. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen, arms crossed, tone rehearsed. "We need to talk about money," he said. I looked up from the counter. "Do we?" He launched into it carefully. How stressed he was, how this situation had taken a toll on him emotionally, how Julia might need help with legal fees. He even suggested, casually, that I should contribute. I stared at him. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to help pay for the consequences of your friend humiliating her husband?" "She's going through a lot," he snapped. "So is Andrew," I replied. "You don't seem concerned about that." That's when Daniel made his final mistake. He implied, clumsily, that I owed him emotional support, that my actions had created a hostile environment, that maybe I should consider covering some therapy sessions for him while he processed everything. I felt something click into place. "No," I said. He blinked. "No, no," I repeated calmly. "And since you've brought up finances and the state of our relationship, you're right, we should talk about it, with lawyers." The color drained from his face. Daniel knew what that meant. I was the primary earner. The apartment, the savings, the stability. Those were mine long before he came along. I had insisted on keeping things clean, separate, documented. He backed down immediately, mumbled something about being emotional, about not meaning it like that. But it was too late. He had tried to make me pay for his denial, and that told me everything I needed to know. That night, I emailed a lawyer. I slept better than I had in months. 6 months later, everything was over. Julia's divorce was brutal. Her lawyer tried to frame the messages as jokes taken out of proportion. Andrew's lawyer didn't laugh. Neither did the judge. Julia lost the house, lost a significant portion of her assets, lost the illusion that cruelty without witnesses was harmless. Her humor didn't translate well in legal language. Daniel tried to come back. Not all at once, not honestly. He suggested counseling, left articles about communication on the counter, talked about starting fresh. But he never said the words that mattered. He never said she was wrong. He never said I failed you. And I realized something important. Daniel didn't want to rebuild trust. He wanted to restore comfort. I filed for separation. The process was clean, efficient, almost merciful. Daniel moved out with what he brought in. No drama, no courtroom theatrics, just the quiet end of something that had already hollowed itself out. The apartment felt strange at first, too quiet. Then it felt peaceful. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted from. Friends who admitted, gently, that Julia had always made them uncomfortable. Friends who told me they were proud of me for not backing down. Sometimes I think about that night, the dinner, the joke, the moment I said, "That's a pretty harsh thing to say about your husband." That was the real beginning. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I just stopped protecting lies that were never mine to carry. People like to call it revenge. I don't. I call it consequences. And the funny thing is, once you stop excusing cruelty, the truth doesn't need your help. It stands on its own.